All right, we've got 41 people here. Welcome, everyone. I'm sure we'll continue to have folks join. And yeah, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. My name is Tasha Truant. I am the Director of Ecosystem Engagement here at Spring. And yeah, coming to you from the lands and waters of the Algonquin Anishinaabe here in Ottawa, where I am grateful to live, work, and play. So as I was just saying, I am super excited to see such a strong turnout for today's webinar. We're at more than 170 folks who signed up. So that's really encouraging, really great to see how many people are interested in this topic and of course in hearing about it from our speakers. Just a bit of context. So if you don't know, in partnership with Thrive Impact Fund and the University of Victoria's Impact Investing Hub, Spring's webinar, Blended Finance webinar series is a part of our broader effort to provide practical and applied learning to advance the field of blended finance here in Canada. In these sessions, we examine the how-to of blended finance, unpacking cases, examples, and tools to learn what's working from leading practitioners. So to introduce today's speakers, I have two people that we are very grateful to have with us today. Jory Cohen is one of Canada's most recognized voices in impact investing and the founder of Silkpin Capital, an impact investing consultancy that helps foundations and institutional investors align their capital with their mission. At Inspirit Foundation, Jory designed and implemented what is believed to be the first institutional portfolio in the country invested entirely for impact. It is also the first known portfolio of its kind to financially outperform conventional benchmarks for more than a decade. And we have Mila Craig, who is the founder, president, and CEO of Milani Inc., an independent capital markets and sustainable advisory firm helping investors integrate ESG issues and impacts into their decision-making. Prior to founding Milani in 2008, she worked for more than 15 years in the institutional equity markets for major Canadian financial institutions such as RBC Dominion Securities and Scotia Capital. Throughout her career, Mila has worked closely with senior leaders, investor relations teams, and investment managers across Canadian publicly listed companies, pension funds, and investment funds. So welcome, big welcome to Jory and Mila. Thank you very much for joining us today to talk about reimagining fiduciary duty. And just a little bit of context here is, fiduciary duty emerged from the annual Blended Finance Summit that we had back in March as one of the hottest topics, sometimes controversial, occasionally even emotionally charged. And so we committed to, digging a little bit more deeply into this with our blended finance education programming. And that's why we're here today. I'm going to get into the questions. While I do, please feel free to pop any and all questions that you have in the chat. We'll be monitoring as we go, and we'll save the last portion of today's session for that Q&A. And I think that's all my housekeeping items before I dive into the questions. So, Jory, starting with you, what is fiduciary duty? Aside from something I can't say 5 times fast, what is fiduciary duty? Why is it important? And who defines it?
Well, first, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to talk about this actually because it's such an interesting, important concept. And I feel like fiduciary duty is essentially the backbone of our economic system and one of the most misunderstood concepts of our time.
Mm.
The notion of fiduciary duty has evolved over time. And at this point, it's almost always assumed that what it means is to maximize financial returns at pretty much all legal costs. But that's not what it means. Fundamentally, that is not how fiduciary duty is defined. Fiduciary duty is a set of guiding principles that allow us to act in the best interest of someone else. Not necessarily to maximize financial returns, although it could, but to act in someone else's best interests. And I think that's really important to keep in mind as we have this conversation today, but also moving forward. And a lot of you may know this, but when it comes to the term fiduciary duty, and when investors point to fiduciary duty, whether they're institutional investors or pension funds or financial advisors or board of directors, most often when that term is thrown out in the open, it's not actually defined. Like, there's no accompanied definition. And if it is defined, almost always it's not defined as fiduciary duty is maximizing financial returns. So it's really important to make that distinction when we hear the term fiduciary duty, trying to separate it with the most common interpretation, the most assumed assumption of make as much money as possible at all costs. Fiduciary duty today, for the most part, I would argue, doesn't incorporate beneficiaries or stakeholders, their viewpoints. And the people making decisions, the organizations, the structures making decisions for others, whether they're pension funds or whomever, my viewpoint would be that if they're just trying to maximize financial returns, for the most part, they're not understanding the priorities of their beneficiaries and their stakeholders. They're not understanding the best interests of the people that they're making decisions for, their fiduciary duty. I would argue that for the most part, many of the decisions that are made in modern times are veering towards breaching that fiduciary duty.
Mm,
And we've seen, when we have that interpretation of make as much money as possible, there tends to be blinders that come on, and there's consequences. There are obvious social and environmental consequences, but there are financial ones too. And so that almost ruthless pursuit of profit, that myopic vision, often backfires. And we see it all the time. It's right out in the open. And we see it with companies all the time, whether it's Volkswagen and Dieselgate or SNC-Lavalin and Libya and BP, Deepwater Horizon. Like, these are decisions that are being made under the guise of fiduciary duty to shareholders or whomever that obviously backfire socially, environmentally, but it's very easy to see the financial implications too. And so I would argue that a more holistic interpretation of fiduciary duty isn't just more representative of the beneficiaries and the stakeholders and the best interests, but also tend to produce higher financial results, especially in the long term.
okay. Um, that's super interesting response, Jory. And at the end, I might dig in a little bit around your use of the word breach. A very interesting perspective. But for the moment, Mila, I'll turn to you. So with your clients, once you get past the question of fiduciary duty, I mean, and then tell us a little bit about how that sounds. What barriers or enablers may follow?
Can I come back actually before we even go there? Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me.
You can.
Because I have I think some points that I'd like to make to complement what Jory has mentioned around defining of fiduciary duties. So thank you for having me. And I will state off the top, I am not a lawyer. So, what I'm sharing in the following are some comments that have been received through some work that we've done. from lawyers. And I think it is helpful to come back to, there are some obligations from some organizations. Um, so as I speak to this, I also want to kind of say it's about sort of ESG integration and impact investing. So just, there's different levels there. But maybe to express that, I wanted to share that sort of spring of this year, in collaboration with Realize Capital Partners, we've been convening a series of impact investing sessions, which brought together about 12 institutions from across Canada who are more those mid-sized asset managers. And they were defined pension plans, a pension plan that had a dual mandate, some life insurance companies, and then university endowments and private and community foundations. So a real mix of organizations. And what we decided was we had to get over the hump of this question on fiduciary duty right at the beginning, or we would never succeed in this series at all. So maybe that's a first takeaway for people. So what we did is we actually kicked off with a session on fiduciary duty. And what we did is we brought in two lawyers, two legal experts to share their insights. So one was focused on pension and institutional mandates, and then the others were on foundations and charities. And so through those, we talked about how fiduciary duty may differ from one organization to another. So if you don't mind, I'd just like to kind of hit those, because I think it's really important so that we don't make blanket statements around this particular topic, because if we can get over this, which we have seen happens, we can get over it, and then we can move forward and actually create the market and create funds. So for the pension plans, and I did not know this until this legal expert shared it, that there is a long-standing case from England that still shapes how fiduciary duty is understood in Canada. And part of that is because the pension mandate is fundamentally financial, and that the financial interest of the plan members remains the central consideration. But it does not mean that impact or ESG factors are off the table. So under current Canadian case law, they can be considered when they have financial implications. Okay, so if an ESG factor, an environmental, social, or governance factor, can have a financial consequence, considering it is not a departure of the duty of prudence, but it's part of exercising that duty. One of the biggest takeaways was what I heard was that the decision doesn't have to be perfect by an investment committee. What it needs to be is it needs to be reasonable. It needs to be well documented, and it needs to be grounded in this risk and return thinking. So framed that way, an impact investment can be permissible if it stands up on that on the risk return merits. And so I think that's really, really important. Investment committee members do not need to be perfect. It's, have you done the work? Is it well documented? And what is it grounded in? And then there are some other pension plans where I mentioned dual mandates, where there are some pension plans that actually it's not just the financial returns, that they actually have a statement of a secondary objective, which can often be regional economic development along with that return objective. Okay, so it's something that's really important, I think, to understand that there are some of those issues at play. I think Jory's already spoken very much to the foundation side as well on the mission of to advance the mission of sustainably, sorry, not of sustainability, but sustainably. And I think, what it's just about when we're thinking about fiduciary duty, it does require balancing sort of financial returns with the organization's time horizons, potential liquidity needs, regulations under which they might follow, and the relationship then between the investment and the mission of that organization. So I just think it's really important that we understand that element.
No, that's great. That's great clarity, Mila. And if I could even just push you for an example from that first group, obviously not naming names, but is there an example that you can think of where that financial impact from an ESG factor made the difference in how fiduciary duty was understood in that context.
Yeah, well, and maybe the example I'll give you is after we did the session with all of these groups, we polled everybody about what the barriers are.
Mm-hmm.
What was really interesting was that it was no longer the fiduciary duty no longer came up as a barrier. So it was by taking the time to explain and really help those who are trying to move in impact investing forward, to help them understand, yeah, there are mechanisms, but you have to work within those. And that's part of, as we're working with our clients, we like to explain there's a spectrum, right? And it's about understanding those nuances and who the organization is and and it's going to be different for every organization. Okay.
Okay.
So
Okay, and thank you. That's a lot of specificity that we need. So thank you for all that context. With respect to Inspirit Foundation's context, so Jory, when and how did the role of fiduciary duty play a role in moving the foundation towards, now famously the 100% impact first portfolio? And what does the data tell us about the results of this approach?
Thank you. Mila, great points. So it's so important to have that context, and I think, and Tasha, I will get to your question. And can you just tell me, can you hear me okay? Because I'm competing. Okay, I have something going on in somebody's backyard. Um, I'm not a lawyer. I should have said that too. Um, and the study of case law is so fascinating when it comes to fiduciary duty because it is directly borrowed from England from a few centuries ago when this became a law. And when it became law, the spirit behind it, there was always this societal lens when it came to decision making and fiduciary duty. At least that is my interpretation. So even in the case law, I think when it came over here and then subsequent events in modern history around shareholder primacy, the Chicago School of Thought, like the terms stayed the same, but the interpretation morphed. And I think it's actually really worthwhile to go back to the case law and say, well, what did it actually mean? Like, let's take another look. And so, I wouldn't mind to have a legal perspective actually take another look at that and say, oh, okay, let's actually get to the spirit of it rather than how we really interpret, one word or two words. That's my aside. As you can tell, I've done a lot of thinking around fiduciary duty. I think it's incredibly consequential to where we are today and how we move forward. And what we did at Inspirit Foundation, so you heard a little bit of my bio. For those who don't know me, uh, context is I was with Inspirit Foundation for about a decade. Uh, now I'm on my own with a consultancy and Inspirit's a client, so the work continues. The Spirit Foundation is a public foundation, and in 2016 committed to a 100% impact portfolio. So impact investments throughout the entire portfolio across all public and private asset classes. It was my job to make that transition from a traditional portfolio to only impact. And in 2017, what we did is we updated our investment policy statement. But by update, I mean we rewrote it. We created a new one. And in it, we defined fiduciary duty as optimizing for both financial returns and positive impact, and positive impact being contribution to our mission. It's extremely important that we did that. It is a formal definition of fiduciary duty adopted by the board of directors. It's public, it's transparent, it's on our website. And as you know, the investment policy statement is a guide to decision making, how we make investment decisions, and fiduciary duty is right at the core of that. And so what we did is we actually defined it, which is rare, and then we defined it in a way that is more holistic in nature, that obviously transcends financial performance only. We weren't the first ones to do that. I've been following the work of Heron Foundation in New York City for years. Prior to us doing that, they committed to a 100% impact portfolio in the States, and their investment policy statement defined fiduciary duty as something like duty of care and loyalty and obedience, which are familiar fiduciary duty terms, to their mission, to the greater public work that they do. That's the first time that I saw fiduciary duty framed that way. Um, it's, I will say, of course, it is a lot easier to do at an organization with a mission perspective, a foundation, a charitable entity, for sure. And at the same time, the reason why it's done is a connection to mission, but connection to stakeholders, right? Beneficiaries of these foundations. And that's where I feel like there's such an opportunity for large groups, institutional investors, boards, pension funds, to define fiduciary duty in relation to their stakeholders and their beneficiaries. Um, the other important aspect when it comes to closing I guess the story within Spirit is there is always this notion, almost always this notion of if you invest with a more holistic lens, you inevitably sacrifice financial returns, right? We are all familiar with that. And that ties directly into fiduciary duty, of how the frame around why fiduciary duty's definition needs to be more narrow and focused on financial returns only. Well, in Spirit, we at least have evidence of something different. And it's anecdotal evidence. It's only one investor here, but it's significant. And so what we did is we traced back 10 years since the commitment to a 100% impact portfolio. We just released a report, retrospective, looking back on the past decade and comparing our performance to a very traditional benchmark composed of just common indexes. And at the end of 10 years, what we saw was financial outperformance. It was minimal. It was 0.7% over 10 years cumulative. That's not annual, that's the cumulative. But it's significant. It demonstrates that you do not have to sacrifice financial returns in order to think like this, invest like this, and be bound by or be guided by a duty that incorporates more holistic decision making and outcomes.
Thank you. Mila, Jory covered a lot of ground there. Do you want to react to some of his comments, or should we move into what your client journey looks like?
I'd love to. You saw me taking notes here.
Me too.
I just wanted to add, I think, what Jory's saying is we're actually seeing this happen in some cases with some of the large pension plans today. I large and mid-sized, like we're actually seeing examples of pension plans that are going out to their stakeholders. And part of that, I think, is driven, it was originally driven by some of the European regulations around materiality assessments. And at one point in time, now they've kind of stepped back on some of these regulations, but not very long ago, if you wanted some of the labels in the European funds, you actually needed to be able to demonstrate as an asset manager or an asset owner that you have actually done a materiality assessment for your own organization. And what we've seen through that is as organizations do so, one of the steps that you need to take is you actually need to go out and talk or solicit input from your stakeholders. And I think, there's a great example here in Canada of UPP having done that. And they state that very clearly in some of their reports, where they went out and they did actually solicit their stakeholders. So that's the university pension plan. And, by having done that, then what they heard back was from their stakeholders that they still wanted financial returns, but not at the cost of, right? So they do care about climate change. They do care about inequality, these things, but they still want their pensions. So it then became a balancing act. And so, UPP has come out and been very clear about where they are spending their time and their focus because of the financial implications to the portfolio, and because they've heard from their stakeholders that climate and inequality are two areas where they are going to work very diligently. They are going to engage with the companies that they invest in, et cetera. So, it is, I think, I've been doing this for a long time, almost 19 years now. I think we're at a new place. And I think this is the excitement that I have around, the ESG and the impact space in particular, is that we are moving into a new area. And, so maybe just, so just to comment there, but I don't know, do you want me to continue sort of how we kind of accompany some of our clients within this, or do you
Yeah,
want to
like
go
what
someplace
works?
else?
Yeah.
Well, to Jory's point as well, we often get the call going, we need to change our policy, or we want to, or we need a policy. And we're like, okay, great. But in order to have a policy, we need to go back numerous steps here, because the policy needs to be a reflection of the decisions that you are going to make as an organization. And, to Jory's point, what that is an end result of a lot of thinking, and the defining then of who the organization is, who the stakeholders are, what are the decisions that are made. So that's, for us, that's often what we do. There's education and creating shared language, both for, investment committees, and if there are investment teams, et cetera. That's a really, really important part. Setting the governance, so clarifying your definitions and what commitments are going to be made, creating that framework. Okay, this all really matters. And then there's kind of once we get to that, there's the question of, do they have internal resources, or is it an OCIO? And if we need to take it in house, there are some really important structural elements around resources and things of that nature. So these, there's numerous steps that you need to take. But I think the point is, the more you do it, we've seen it over and over again, the more we do that kind of work, both the investment committees, the boards, and like, you get alignment within the organization. And then you're able to move forward with the investments. And I think that's a really important element, is, for a committee to be familiar with the topic versus really understanding it. They're two different things. And if you want to move, you have to take the time to make sure that you bring everyone along in that process and get the clarity and the decision making.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so in the context of this being the Blended Finance webinar series, going to zone in a little bit there, how can Blended Finance offer solutions within this context? Do we have any blended finance cases or examples that we can point to? That's really for both of you. I don't know who wants to go first.
You go first, Jory.
Should we keep the pattern? Yeah. Yeah, I think the use of blended finance ties directly to fiduciary duty in a sense. The ability to engage in that sort of structure can really only be done, from my vantage point, when there's a clear definition of fiduciary duty, and then that transcends financial performance only. If we're looking at fiduciary duty as the most common application of it, I don't really see much of a role for blended finance. And I could be missing the mark here, but it's such an important tool to advance mission. And if we have an explicit definition of fiduciary duty that includes a more holistic representation of what we want to accomplish beyond financials only, then blended finance is a wonderful instrument to employ. We did it at Inspirit, continue to do it. We formally created a sub-asset class in our asset mix under fixed income, 0% loans. It's a small portion of the portfolio. It's a 5% target, which is, I mean, it's not that small, but it's not massive. And what we've done is we pursued in opportunities that are deeply aligned with our mission, and that our hope is just to return the capital and, of course, have strong alignment with the purpose of the organization. And so we've done this a number of times, but an example would be our support of Entrepreneurth. Many of you might be familiar with them. They're an incredible organization that for years have worked with Indigenous entrepreneurs in the Northern Territories. And for the first time so they've supported entrepreneurs with wraparound and technical assistance. And for the first time, they're going to be launching a fund, investment fund, that will actually provide financing to the entrepreneurs in their ventures. And we thought this was a wonderful opportunity to advance our mission, to support good work, and are only requesting, our principal in return. We've done this a number of times with different projects. Now, I would say that if we committed 100% of our portfolio to these type of instruments, I'd probably make the argument that actually we were probably breaching our financial aspect of fiduciary duty. And so this is not something that I would say you want to blanket your portfolio with. But the way I see portfolios, the way I see fiduciary duty is from a holistic portfolio perspective. And so when a portion of your portfolio is invested in something like this, with obviously deeper impact and less financial return, that's balanced with what some of the rest of your portfolio has. It's an optimization game. And for us, it's worked really well, but it's only because we have that explicit definition of what fiduciary duty is and also what it isn't. And that allows us to incorporate blended finance into our strategies.
Thank you. Milo, Milo, what about you? Do you have an
Yeah,
example to share? Yeah.
yeah, I think, so from some of that work that we've done earlier this year, just barriers, right? So two of the top barriers that we hear is return expectation and track records. So, impact investing is growing, but it's still in that there's nascent in some cases with respect to managers and things of that nature, and we want to encourage more, right? So sometimes this, the what they call kind of first vintage funds, they don't have the track record. And you get to the investment committee, and it just makes them that it's that coming back to that comment I made earlier about the risk reward, right? So I think when you're able to get the structure where there is public or philanthropic capital absorbing the first losses, it can change that risk reward scenario for the institutional capital, and then that lets the market kind of start building the track record that it needs. And I think that's really like it's one of like it may not always need to be needed, but I think at this juncture point in trying to develop further, in particular the impact investing market, I think it does really come in handy because it helps get over some of the humps. And maybe one of the examples and was the social finance fund with Realized Capital Partners, where the federal government had placed 400 million of first loss capital across three wholesalers. And 135 of that was with Realized Capital Partners. And that the goal of that was to de-risk private participation in the Canadian impact investing community. And, so we've seen them making the investments. There was some good news out a few weeks ago here. And so, we're really starting to see that that's happening, and it's really bringing that combined pool with blended finance. It's really, doing what it's meant to do, which is starting to crowd in some of the institutional capital into the market. And so I just, I think it's the other side of this. And maybe as an example, we came up with a phony case along the process of the series that we were working on. And, first time around, there was no blended finance. Second time around, we gave them a case where there was. And it made all the difference between the desire and the ability to go to the investment committee and work towards trying to get this approved. So I think, it's there. It does have some caveats. So, your protection can depend on the capital, your capital commits, but fine print really matters here. And it's meant to de-risk the structure, but it does not replace due diligence. And I think, it can't be one or the other. It's really, in our view, it's meant to be, I think, a bit like Jory is saying, it's meant to be scaffolding to get the market going and to get things moving. But it's not meant to be here for the long, long term in the marketplace. It's a phase to help build the market and demonstrate that, all of these projects can be, again, from our perspective, that financial piece. And that's how we get, in my view, how we get things mainstreamed.
Okay, interesting perspective. Jory, how do you feel about Myla's reference to it being a phase?
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting comment, but I'll touch on one thing before that, because I think what Mila's also referencing is that different investors have a different role to play. And I think
Yes.
that's really important. We're talking about, Milo was alluding to small first-time fund managers. We can't expect pension funds to invest in these without some form of risk mitigation. It's not going to happen. Uh, and so we have to also be really realistic about how we get larger institutional dollars to rethink their investing and rethink their fiduciary duty and align them. And so when I think about foundation capital, and Milo was saying this too, what's the role of foundation capital to get these projects off the ground, to support them in the very early stages, and then to crowd in some capital that probably wouldn't be there without that foundation capital, without that really early support. And we need to be thinking about that, because we can't just expect these large institutional actors to say, yeah, now we'll do that. Now we'll invest in this first-time fund manager. They rarely invest in first-time managers across the board. It's not an impact thing. It's a risk tolerance
Yep.
objective or constraint. And, I would argue there's different ways to measure track record, and sometimes first-time managers are actually much better bets. And that's kind of a different conversation that we can have later, or with pension funds, but or larger investors. But I think we just have to acknowledge that. And I don't know if I fully agree about the fact that blended finance is phased, and the intent is to get to a place where it could be projects more market sustaining. I think for some, for sure. And I also think there are some projects, funds that maybe shouldn't get there. They should always
Mm.
rely on some form of blended finance, because the impact is so deep, and then you don't want to sacrifice the impact, right? And I don't, Milo, you weren't saying that. I know that, but I just want to make that clear. In some respect, yeah, let's get things off the ground and see what they can do, and others, oh, we got to stick with it.
Thank you. Okay, so wanting to turn it to the Q&A in just a little bit, but before I do, just in terms of moving towards action, so we've talked a bit about the role of investment committees. For those audience members who are not sitting on investment committees themselves, what are some concrete actions they can take to reshape how we interpret fiduciary duty? Something people can walk away with that they can put on their to-do list.
Well, I think the first thing I'm going to say is, I think, understand, I think we both stated it, every organization's a bit different. And it's really about working with the organization to help understand the uniqueness of that organization and defining it for that organization. Okay, so it is going to be the biggest hump, but we've seen it over and over and over again. You can get over this hump. It's about ensuring that there's good education, there's good examples, that there's a process. So I recognizing not everyone sits on investment committees. I wish that was the community, because I think that is part of the issue, is that we do need to continue to help members of investment committees understand. Um, again, I've been kind of tracking this over, my view was I had to do ESG before I could do impact. Now, Jory's coming from a different place and, but we fought over 19 years to help just get the concept of ESG adopted by the marketplace, that there is value creation by looking at these topics. And I think we're there. I think the other thing I might say, Tasha, is we do a survey twice a year of institutional investors in Canada. And I don't have the specific numbers to share with you yet, but we have asked a very specific question about impact investing over the month of June of 2026. And the question was, I'm seeing more around impact investing in the market right now. And my question was, is that because we see more silencing around ESG as a backlash, or do you actually think that impact investing is maturing in the cycle? And the majority, again, I don't have the exact number, but I will say the majority of those institutional investors have answered to us both.
Mm.
And so there is an acknowledgement right now that the ESG road has basically been paved. As much as the headlines might say different, it's not the case. But for impact, there really is a very sincere openness and interest to try to understand how for the individual organizations and their structures and regulations, et cetera. And I think that is the key. It has to be in the context of the organization, understand those things well, and then you can move forward with that. So that would be my piece. That would be my comment on it.
Yeah, I love that. And from a personal perspective, I would say, look, if you're part of a pension fund, if you're a beneficiary, if you're a stakeholder, make your voice heard. I think it's really important for beneficiaries to have their voice be included in the decision making, and do it in a way where you literally define what you want. What are your best interests?
Mhm.
It's their job to fulfill them or to act in your best interests. Make it known. Same with your financial advisors, right? When we talk about fiduciary duty, that is an extremely important relationship between financial advisor and client. Do they know what your interests are? I mean, mine sure didn't. So these are like have those conversations, and engaging board of directors is a little bit trickier. It takes a little bit more organization, like stewardship, and there are amazing organizations who do that. Share is one of them. So I think there are ways to make your voice heard. And when I say that, I mean let people know what your best interests are. You're the beneficiary. Make them do their jobs.
Thank you. Okay. And it's it's funny that you both clarified you're not lawyers. I'm also not a lawyer, and yet we have several legal questions in the chat. So I'll just read them, and you can tackle them, or if you're seeing a question come up that you prefer to address, just let me. But yeah, a question on legal and policy actions. So if we want the market to reimagine fiduciary duty, that's on me for giving it this title. Can we do more than changing minds given that interpretation can be wider than often thought? Or are there opportunities to take forward legal challenges or policy initiatives to advance this?
So I'm gonna try to answer that based on my understanding. Are there opportunities to challenge it from a legal perspective? Um, I really don't know. I mean, I would say yes. And at the start of the conversation, I said that I do think many of decisions are veering towards breaching of the duty itself.
Mm.
Um, Not intentionally. Like I stand by that, but I don't feel like it's an intentional breach of fiduciary duty. I don't think directors of corporations and decision makers are saying let's use fiduciary duty as a way to extract as much value as possible. I just think this is the way that this system is now interpreted and set up. And I think, I would personally love to see fiduciary duty defined. I would
Yeah.
like every relationship that is actually acting in the interest of another to define what that duty is and make it explicit. And I think we will see that almost 100% of those definitions, if that were to happen, would not say we're maximizing money making. It wouldn't. And so there's a challenge there that we could issue, not just around uh, you're applying it wrong, but I would love to see the
Yeah.
first step is define it. Have investors define what fiduciary duty means to them.
So it's interesting if I can, it's a number of years back, and I'm not going to get the name of the organization or the initiative again correct because it's too long back. But there was, I'm going to say probably 8 years ago, um, there was a sustainable finance something, and it was Barb's Van, Tiff Macklin, Andy Chisholm, and Kim Thomasin, I believe. So 4 leaders from finance in Canada who had come together and put together this whole roadmap for Canada on how you could integrate sustainable finance into the Canadian financial system. And one of those recommendations was clarity on fiduciary duty. The expert panel, thank you, Rod. The expert panel on sustainable finance. And it was one of the recommendations was that we actually get clarity on this. So, there are many efforts being made on many of the recommendations on that from the expert panel. We don't hear much on this one. So someone's asking, yes, that's probably one that we could get behind. I don't know. I don't know if how or when we might succeed on that. But I think the flip side of that, maybe from my side, is maybe we have to be careful what we ask for too, because if someone clarifies it for us, it may not align with what we actually can do as an organization by defining it ourselves. And I think it comes back to my point earlier of doing the work before you create your policy, understanding who your stakeholders are, understanding what they want of this organization and what their expectations are, and then you define it. So I'm a little bit, yes, we could, but if you're looking for something, but at the same time, we sometimes have to be careful about what we may be dictated to rather than giving us the flexibility, where foundations like InSpirit and Jory's leadership was there to be able to push and demonstrate things can happen. So yeah, just a fine line there for me on that one.
Okay, thank you. Are either of you catching questions there that you're really burning to address, or would you like me to pick one for you? A number of the questions are sort of solution oriented themselves. So yeah, I'll throw this one out there because it's captured my attention. But if fiduciary duty requires informed oversight of financially material risks, should we be rethinking how boards evaluate executive competency, particularly around climate and nature, in the same way we evaluate other executive functions, financial CIO and legal expertise as a few examples, in order to meet an appropriate standard of care?
I think absolutely. I think board members should be evaluated on the material elements for that business or for that organization. And I think we're hopefully moving towards that. I mean, board members have a duty of care as well, and I think that is happening increasingly. That's part of the corporate governance that that investors take, is overseeing and using their voice to be able to provide feedback to organizations about their board members. But absolutely, I mean, climate change, I think, is well understood as being a financially material risk two portfolios. Um, there are other topics. So yeah, personally, yes, I think it's what's material for the business, and the board members should have a good knowledge on those topics, or that there is strong education provided to those board members to help support them in their learning and ensuring that they can understand the topics of which they have oversight.
Exactly. And I would argue that if they don't incorporate exactly what Mila said, they're veering on breaching their fiduciary duty to the corporation or to the organization.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm going to jump up to the top here. You had mentioned, Mila, around dual mandates. Question here from Watson Board Advisors. Where is the secondary benefit in a dual mandate plan commonly stated? Is it in the pension agreement?
A
A
great
question for a lawyer.
question. Yeah, that I don't know. I don't know specifically in what document, but we know that there are, here I'm based in Montreal, and very well known here in Canada is that that La Caisse, I guess is the new name, or the Caisse de dépôt et placement de Québec, are very clear that they have a dual mandate. And it is, financial returns and regional economic development. And so they make decisions, they make investments based on both of those. So there are probably others, but I don't know specifically in which agreement, et cetera.
Thank you. Okay. And you've both done such a good job of sharing your own perspectives, your own organization's perspectives, and the many organizations that you work with. Joy, I suppose both of you, what other voices should be invited or amplified in these conversations? Any perspectives on fiduciary duty that you think need to be, better included?
Well, I think it's really important that we all know fiduciary duty is not a new concept. And while the term might be a couple hundred years old, or the roots of it, the concept of acting in the best interest of another is obviously not. And there are many civilizations that have grappled with this. There are, indigenous perspectives that have really shaped some understandings of what that means, acting in the best interests of another, generations down the line. So one organization that I turn to is called Reconciliation Responsible Investment Institute, RRII. They're an incredible group, and they released a document uh, outlining what fiduciary duty could look like, incorporating indigenous viewpoints. And then we start to really think about, okay, stewardship of the land, seven generations principle. These are concepts that, in my opinion, are way too often ignored when it comes to fiduciary duty. I think that's pretty fair to say. And once you start opening up that interpretation to different viewpoints, it becomes incredibly powerful. And that's just not something we've explored enough. And certainly, the mainstream application of fiduciary duty is so far away from that when I really don't think it should be. And so I would love to see some of those viewpoints incorporated more into the conversation.
Maybe I'll just finish off really quickly, Tash. I know we're up to time here, but just to say, what we're seeing from leaders in this area is, institutions are making progress. There are many who are finding their way along. I think the key point would be start without waiting for everything to be perfect. Invest in the learning, and over time that momentum will compound. And I think that's it's like, don't aim for perfection, but bring people along with you. I think that's the biggest message that I would leave as what we're seeing from leaders.
Good wisdom in many aspects of life overall. And on that very positive note, I will start to wrap us up. So thank you both so much. We were hoping that, yeah, as we discussed in our prep for this call, we were hoping that we were bringing kind of a balance of perspectives. And I think we can absolutely say we benefited from that balance and the cumulative wisdom that you're both bringing. So thank you so much. I will say, just throwing this out there, we've talked about doing a fiduciary duty part 2 webinar because we had so much interest. Sorry, so this is a question and reflection for our audience. So if there are other speakers, other perspectives on fiduciary duty that you would like to hear from, do feel free to email me. We do, as with all of our blended finance education work, we aim to meet the needs of our audience. We're going to pop some of my contact information in the chat here as well. And yeah, just to share as well. So next up in our webinar series, on Wednesday, August 12th, at the same time slot as this one, we're hosting Cindy Willard from Impact Charitable to have a discussion with us on donor advised funds, or DAFs, as catalytic capital. So that's what's up next. And yeah, any closing thoughts, or shall we say goodbye and have a great day to our audience here? All
I think
right.
I've said mine. Yep.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day. We hope to see you at the next one.
Thank you, Tasha.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.